The Philadelphia Experiment, the story of one of the most mysterious projects in history. For a nation to become powerful, to stand at the top of the world, it takes more than ambition. It requires economic strength, military power, and scientific superiority. During World War II, the United States believed it was getting very close to that goal. But what happens when science goes too far? What happens when a military experiment doesn't just fail, but enters a realm beyond control? In 1943, the world was engulfed in the flames of World War II. At the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, one of the most important naval bases of the United States, the atmosphere was constantly tense. The sound of metal clashing, machinery roaring, and warships being built and upgraded filled the air, all serving a single purpose: victory at sea. At the time, there was a rule that seemed almost unbreakable. Whoever controlled the sea controlled the world. Convoys, battle fleets, supply routes, everything depended on the ocean. And to protect them, the United States needed ships that were stronger, faster, and most importantly, harder to detect. At the center of this effort was a destroyer escort, USS Eldridge, DE-173. At first glance, it wasn't the largest or most powerful ship, but it became the perfect candidate for a classified experiment, one that could completely change the way wars were fought. The problem was this: no matter how advanced a warship was, it still had unavoidable weaknesses. First, the ocean is an open space. No mountains, no forests, no cover. A ship at sea is essentially a massive moving target. Second, it's easily visible. In daylight, or even through binoculars from afar, its position is almost impossible to hide. But that still wasn't the most dangerous flaw. The greatest weakness lay in something invisible: magnetism. Every metal ship, as it moves through Earth's magnetic field, creates its own electromagnetic signature, which means even in complete darkness, even with no visible light, radar can still detect it, and it gets worse. Beneath the ocean, there existed a deadly weapon: magnetic mines. These mines don't need to see their target. They only need to sense changes in the magnetic field. And when a ship passes nearby, even the slightest disturbance is enough to trigger an explosion. No warning, no chance to escape. In a split second, a ship could be torn apart from below. And so, war was no longer just about guns, artillery, or bombs. It had entered a new dimension, a war of electromagnetic fields. And from that realization, a bold idea began to take shape. To solve this critical weakness, the U.S. Navy began with a solution that seemed simple, yet incredibly important: degaussing warships. The idea was straightforward. If a ship no longer produced a significant magnetic field, then magnetic mines beneath the ocean wouldn't be able to sense it. No detection meant no detonation. In fact, this technology already existed in basic form. Cables wrapped around the ship's hull carried electric current, neutralizing its natural magnetic signature. The result? The ship became effectively invisible to magnetic mines. It was a major breakthrough. But for the U.S. Navy at the time, it wasn't enough, because even if degaussing worked perfectly, the ship could still be detected by radar, still be seen with the naked eye, still remain a massive target in the open ocean. And from that realization, a far more radical idea began to emerge: not just hiding from mines, but making the ship completely disappear. No radar signal, no visual image, no trace, as if it had never existed. This plan was given a name: the Rainbow Project. It sounded like science fiction, but surprisingly, they didn't see it that way. They believed it could be done. And that belief came from a scientific idea introduced nearly 2 decades earlier. In 1925, Albert Einstein proposed a bold concept: the unified field theory. a theory that attempted to unify the fundamental forces of nature, especially gravity and electromagnetism, into a single framework. In simple terms, if these forces were truly connected, then manipulating electromagnetic fields might influence space itself, and perhaps even time. This led to a stunning possibility: bending space around an object. If light were bent, the human eye would not be able to see it. If radar waves were deflected, detection systems would fail. And in that moment, a ship could become invisible, not by hiding, but by being removed from the way we perceive reality. It sounded insane, but at a time when science was advancing faster than ever. This was an opportunity the U.S. Navy could not ignore. However, there was one major problem. Einstein's unified field theory was never completed. It existed only as a foundation, a direction, but it was missing critical pieces. Even today, no one has fully solved it. And that meant what the U.S. Navy was attempting was not just applying science. It was stepping into uncharted territory. Albert Einstein was a brilliant scientist, but he belonged to the world of theory. Equations and concepts could unlock the mysteries of the universe, but they couldn't turn themselves into real machines. And that was the problem. The U.S. Navy didn't need a beautiful idea. They needed something that worked, something that could be installed on a ship, activated, and change the course of war. So in 1942, they turned to someone very different, Nikola Tesla, an eccentric genius, often called the master of electricity and magnetism. If Einstein drew the map, then Tesla was the one who could build the road. As soon as he joined the project, Tesla got to work almost immediately. He didn't just understand theory. He had the rare ability to turn invisible forces into real-world technology. The early experiments progressed quickly, and at first, the results suggested they were on the right path. But then, during a series of smaller-scale tests, Tesla began to notice something was wrong. The effects they observed did not match their expectations. The electromagnetic field being generated was not only affecting equipment, it was affecting people. Strange symptoms began to appear: disorientation, temporary paralysis, distorted perception. And worse, these effects were unstable, uncontrollable, unpredictable. Tesla understood exactly what that meant. If they continued, the experiment could lead to serious consequences, not just failure, but loss of life. So he made a request: more time to understand what was happening, more time to control the risks. But war does not follow the logic of science. Every day meant thousands of lives. Every project was under immense pressure. Results: immediately. The pressure from the Navy kept growing. They didn't care about perfection. They needed something that could be used. But Tesla was not a man who compromised with danger. He saw things others did not. And this time, he chose to refuse. Conflict erupted. On one side, the military, demanding results at any cost. On the other, a scientist who understood the price. In the end, Tesla walked away from the project, decisively, not long after. He died alone in a hotel room, and almost immediately. His research documents were seized. No release, no explanation. What he knew may have disappeared with him. Or worse, it may have fallen into the hands of those who continued the project in the very direction he once warned against. After Nikola Tesla left the project, everything did not stop. In fact, it couldn't stop. The war was still raging, and the pressure from the military kept growing. In 1943, Albert Einstein was brought in with the hope of strengthening the theoretical foundation, but even a genius could not deliver the breakthrough they needed. So the Navy kept searching. They turned to John von Neumann, a brilliant mind in mathematics and physics, but even he could not fully solve the problem. The project was reaching a dead end, until another name appeared: Thomas Townsend Brown. A new research team was formed. They worked relentlessly, day and night, and after nearly 6 months, by August 1943, they believed they had succeeded. August 12, 1943, 9 a.m. The experiment officially began. At the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, everything had been prepared in advance. 2 massive Tesla coils were installed onto the ship, USS Eldridge, DE-173. On board, there were 12 men, officers and sailors selected for the test. No one knew exactly what was about to happen. The order was given. The system was activated. At first, just a faint vibration, but within seconds, the ship began to shake violently. The air around it seemed to compress. Then suddenly, a strange blue glow appeared, enveloping the entire hull. Electric arcs began to form. Sparks of energy shot across the surface, crawling along the metal like living lightning. A piercing sound filled the air, like thousands of electrical currents colliding at once. And then, in a moment no one could react, the ship disappeared. No smoke, no trace. Nothing remained where it once stood, as if it had never existed. At the exact same time, more than 300 kilometers away, near Naval Station Norfolk, a merchant ship suddenly sent out an emergency report. The crew later described, within a thick fog, a massive warship suddenly appeared right in front of them. No approach, no warning. It simply appeared. The ship lingered for a few minutes, silent, heavy, as if it didn't belong there. And then, just as suddenly as it came, it vanished again. Moments later, back in Philadelphia, USS Eldridge, DE-173, reappeared. But this time, it was no longer the same ship. Those who boarded it were met with a horrifying scene. Sections of the ship were on fire. Equipment was destroyed. Crew members were severely injured. And worse, some men had completely disappeared. No trace, no explanation. The survivors were in a state of shock. When questioned, they could only recall fragments. They could no longer see the outside world. Everything around them faded into a void. Their bodies were frozen, unable to move, as if an invisible force had locked them in place. And then, everything stopped. No light, no sound, only a gap in memory. What happened next? They couldn't remember. The results of the experiment were beyond anything the Navy had anticipated. They had not just touched invisibility. They may have opened a door to something humanity had never fully understood. The results of the experiment were beyond anything anyone had expected. What the U.S. Navy witnessed was no longer just invisibility, not just radar interference, not just visual concealment. It may have been something far more dangerous: teleportation, a warship appearing and disappearing between 2 locations hundreds of kilometers apart in just minutes. If that were true, it wouldn't just change warfare. It could reshape how humanity understands space and reality itself. And so, the U.S. Navy made a decision. Continue. October 1943, second experiment. This time, they were more cautious. No crew was allowed on board. No one would risk what had happened before. The system was activated again. Everyone waited. Would the ship disappear once more? But the result was completely different. The ship did not vanish. No blue light, no sign of teleportation. Everything seemed like a failure. But then, something strange happened. The Tesla coils disappeared. Not destroyed, not burned. They simply vanished from reality. No one could explain it. No one knew where they went. After that, the project was suddenly terminated. No official announcement, no public report. Everything was shut down, as if it had never existed. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. To this day, the U.S. government and military have never confirmed that the experiment ever took place. No records, no documents, no verified evidence, only fragments of stories, whispers of accounts, and a mystery that remains unsolved. So what really happened? Was it a failed experiment, a hidden scientific breakthrough, or a mistake that humanity was never meant to understand? The truth that may have been buried by time, or worse, it still exists, but no one dares to speak of it.